Gettysburg. I am Aaron Smith, your host, and we are talking about probably my favorite part of the Gettysburg battlefield, my favorite part of the Civil War, the stuff that I think is the coolest, and we're talking about big guns. We're talking about cannons. The Battle of Gettysburg had a lot of cannon warfare going on. Of course, these were the weapons of mass destruction of the time. So before we get into what I want to talk about today, which is going to be the Great Bombardment before Pickett's Charge, kind of piggybacking off of my last video here from the battlefield discussing the angle, I want to talk a bit about the types of cannons, the parts of a cannon, everything like that we can discuss and dive into. Might be a little technical. I'm no expert by any means, but I just think they're so cool. You know, they're amazing. Frederick the Great of Prussia described cannons as the big guns are the final argument of kings. Of course, we are in America, we don't have kings, so I'm going to adapt that a little bit. I'm going to say that the big guns are the final arguments of nations. So without further ado, let's get into it. Right here is a 10-pounder Parrott. This gun is named after the man who invented the gun, John Parrott, I believe. Most of the guns are going to be named after the people that invented them, or their use, or also famous people that they may be associated with. So let's get into it without further ado. Obviously we have the wheel here. Each of these wheels is going to weigh about 200 pounds. Interesting thing about these wheels and about this gun carriage overall, the gun carriage being the axle and the part here that holds the actual part of the cannon onto the carriage here. The interesting thing about that is a lot of people say, well, this is pretty sturdy, this is pretty heavy, you know, these guys are wheeling this over rough terrain and everything. How are they, you know, what kind of shock system, what kind of suspension do they have? They don't have necessarily suspension like we would think of it. However, these wheels here, they actually kind of cave in like that. And that served a couple different purposes. That helped to absorb a lot of the shock of the rough terrain they might be going over. It also helped to wick away the mud, dirt, water, stuff like that to keep from getting to the cannon. Now, the Parrott gun shoots a 10-pound shell. It is a rifled gun, whereas your Napoleons could shoot maybe 1,000 yards. This could easily reach up to a mile, you know, 1,600 yards. Of course, that's at 5 degrees elevation on the gun itself. Obviously, you know, there's a point where the higher your elevation is, the longer you'll be able to shoot. All distance stats I'm quoting today are coming from that 5% grade. So this at 5% could shoot about a mile. Currently this gun is overlooking, this gun's actually pointed directly at the United States Regular Monument, which is part of the assault that the Confederates, part of the line the Confederates would assault on July 3rd. So let's get into it some more. We have the breech here. You'll notice on the Parrott gun, it has this kind of sleeve on the breech. These were made from cast iron. We have some other guns that were made from wrought iron, and of course the Napoleon guns, they were made from bronze. But this gun is made from cast iron. This gun was, I don't want to say controversial, but a lot of artillerymen didn't really like this gun. It was prone to bursting, whereas if a Napoleon were to burst, the brass, I should really know that if I'm making a video about artillery, huh? But either way, the material used would absorb some of that, and the metal would it wouldn't shatter necessarily. It would kind of absorb a lot of that shock. Whereas this gun here, they said when it exploded, it would shatter into 1,000 pieces, and now we have this huge fragmenting cannon that's probably going to take out some of your horses. Could be taking out your limber chest filled with shells and explosives, and obviously going to be taking out some of the men. So like I said before, a lot of the artillerymen, they didn't like the Parrott guns. That sleeve I was showing you, that was an attempt to reinforce the breech of the weapon to prevent the pressure from essentially blowing up the gun and turning it into a giant bomb. What we have here, however, is a bronze 12-pounder Napoleon. This was the workhorse of the artillery forces here at Gettysburg and in the Civil War. And the American Civil War would actually be the last age of bronze guns. After then, advances in metallurgy and technology made these obsolete. But during this conflict, this was the workhorse. Whereas the Parrott gun was a rifled gun, meaning it could shoot a lot further, a lot more accurately. This was a smoothbore gun. This was essentially a shotgun, for lack of a better term. Interesting thing, don't know if you guys can see the muzzle here, but Confederate Napoleons, they always have this smooth barrel here, whereas Napoleons that were cast and made in the North, they would have kind of a tapered flare out here. So basically, this gun's a smoothbore. It wasn't really super accurate, but it could still do a lot of damage, especially at close range. They would pack a full canister and just blast away anyone that was coming at them. So this gun, like I said, could probably reach at 5 degrees elevation. It could probably reach about 1,000, 1,100 yards. So it could definitely reach out and touch something. But you know, this is not ideal for counter battery activity. This is not an ideal gun to be taking out other cannons with. This is definitely more of an anti-personnel gun. Like I said, it was cast from bronze. It was very reliable. Same basic idea with the wheels. The suspension system was built into the wheels themselves, so it would absorb a lot of shock. Again, we're looking at 198 pounds per wheel. The axle itself is probably another 400, 500 pounds, and plus the gun itself, which could run anywhere from 800 pounds to about 1,100 pounds. It's a gorgeous morning here at the Gettysburg National Military Park. A lot of people walking by. I'm just outside of McMillan's Woods. Gorgeous view of the angle in the tops of trees. So let's get into more of our discussion here. The third type of gun that they had here at the Battle of Gettysburg would have been the 3-inch ordnance rifle, whereas the Parrott gun was a cast iron gun. The 3-inch ordnance rifle was a wrought iron gun. It was a lot more sturdier. It was also a rifle gun, so it was a lot more accurate. You know, we're looking at distances of 2,000 yards, 1,800 yards. Perfect for counter battery fire, trying to get those pesky men over, you know, on a Cemetery Ridge. And then we also had some more guns here at the Battle of Gettysburg. I actually want to end this video by showing you it's actually a really special treat that they have it here on the battlefield. But we also had some howitzers as well, which were smaller smoothbore guns. Their distance probably maxed out at about 800 yards at that 5% grade. They were definitely more of a close range gun. The other thing about the howitzer is that because of their smaller barrel size, they could actually aim them up and lob them over rather than shoot them more directly. So they definitely had their purpose here. Further on down this ridge here, I'm on Seminary Ridge, like I said, right outside of McMillan's Woods. They're at that two-way part of Confederate Avenue before it turns into a one-way. Further on down the ridge, there's actually some great examples of some 12-pound howitzers as well. They also had the Blakely guns. They weren't super popular. The thing about the Blakely guns is that they were a smaller gun, they weighed less, and so they were more prone to inaccuracy, more prone to blowing up inadvertently, those kind of things. So they didn't really like them a whole lot. We also had the 14-pounder James, and the interesting thing about the James is that the James was essentially a bronze gun. They would take Napoleons and they would add rifling grooves in them. The grooves in a cannon are called the lands. They're not called grooves like you would call them in a rifle or a handheld gun, if you will, or a pistol. but they were called lands, so they would carve these lands into the gun. And the thing about brass, though, is that brass, because it's a very flexible metal, a lot of these James guns, the brass lands would actually wear down over time, and they would essentially just end up as smoothbores again. So they didn't really use a whole lot of them. And of course we have the 12-pounder Whitworth, which I will get to at the end of the video, because I think it would be just an amazing way to end this video. So, without further ado, let's get to the Great Bombardment of July 3rd. Got my handy dandy notebook here. I lost my blue little notebook, so I think it's just at the house somewhere. So I have this, you know, little more professional, that's faux leather. Not that you really care about my notebook, but you know, I thought, you know, I'd let you know what's going on. So July 3rd. Robert E. Lee's plan is to attack the Union Center. On July 2nd, he had attacked the right, he had attacked the left, and earlier in that morning, he had considered attacking the left again, but he reconsidered. He figured that if he attacked on the left and he attacked on the right, then surely they must be weak in the center from reinforcing those attacks that happened earlier. We're going to have Pendleton. He's the CSA Chief of Artillery, and they call him Granny Pendleton. He's not very well liked in the Army of Northern Virginia. Unlike the Union, where we have the Chief of Artillery, Henry Hunt, who actually had the powers to direct men and give orders and was in charge of essentially the entire artillery reserve. Pendleton didn't have that luxury. Pendleton, as CSA Chief of Artillery, it was purely an advisory and administrative role. One artilleryman after the Battle of Sharpsburg or Antietam described Pendleton. Pendleton is Lee's weakness. He is like the elephant. We have him, we don't know what to do with him, and it costs the devil of a sight to feed him. So he wasn't very well liked. He essentially got his job through connections with the CSA government, and not to say he didn't know anything about artillery, but he was probably not the best man for the job. Luckily, it was merely an advisory role, an administrative role, and not an actual combat role itself. So the plan of the bombardment, essentially they wanted to pulverize and demoralize the Union line. These Confederate cannons, they're going to aim, their point of aim is going to be between the copse of trees and Ziegler's Grove, which is further up on Cemetery Ridge. So that is where they're going to aim at. That's where essentially the infantry is going to aim. That's where these cannons are going to aim their fire at. Now, this line of cannons is going to run all the way down from the peach orchard over this way. It's going to run all the way along Seminary Ridge. It's going to cross the Gettysburg Road. It's going to run all across Seminary Ridge. It's going to go up this way to the Spangler's Woods and even Oak Hill there, further beyond where the first day's battle is. So you have just a massive gathering of cannons that are going to assault the area between the copse of trees, the angle there, and Ziegler's Grove. Ziegler's Grove, for those of you who have been coming to the battlefield for a while, that is that area kind of where the old Cyclorama building used to be. E.P. Alexander, he described the plan to tear him limbless, as it were. They wanted to cripple the enemy and then go in for the attack. And similar plans there have worked like this in history before. There has been a precedent set that this was an effective tactic. Even as recently in 1859, the Battle of Solferino, between the French and the Austrians, there was a preliminary bombardment by Napoleon III that was successful in breaking the Austrian line, and they were able to then successfully mass charge their troops there and take their line there at Solferino. So Longstreet of the 1st Corps, he placed E.P. Alexander in charge of all his corps artillery, and the 1st Corps, they're going to amass 75 guns, and they're going to run all the way from the Peach Orchard, again across that Emmitsburg Road to Spangler's Woods, and then we're going to have the 3rd Corps guns, and it's going to be about 33 guns of the 3rd Corps that are going to be here as well. And then further on up, we're going to have the 2nd Corps guns, of course the 2nd Corps being under Ewell, 3rd Corps being under A.P. Hill. And the 3rd Corps is going to provide 53 guns, the 2nd Corps will provide 33 guns. So there will be 161 guns facing Cemetery Ridge. It's going to be an incredible amount of guns, these silent sentinels, as they were described, just foreboding. The Union men could see them coming out, and what they thought was going to happen was that they thought that maybe this was a distraction. Perhaps Ewell was moving his Second Corps around, so maybe this was some kind of a screen for Ewell to move his corps around, and they could renew attacks on the left. Either way, it's going to be an incredible amount of cannon. It's going to be incredibly intimidating. So the Confederates then are going to line up their troops behind the guns in preparation for the attack, and also the Union, they're going to have their troops in front of their guns. So pretty much how it is over there, it's going to be a reverse over here on the Confederate line. Professor Michael Jacobs, a professor of mathematics at Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College, he is going to note the time as 1:07 when the fire began. He's also going to note the temperature as 87 degrees that afternoon, and also he's going to also note that the wind was very still, kind of like it is today. There's not a whole lot of wind. Now the reason that is important is because the lack of wind is not going to clear out the incredible amount of smoke that's going to come from these black powder arms here. Black powder is an extremely messy powder to begin with, but it also creates an incredible amount of smoke, and it's going to create this fog of war. And the Confederate artillerists that were not here on July 2nd, they're going to struggle tuning their aims in, tuning their sights in to aim at that area between the copse of trees and Ziegler's Grove. So the fire, according to Michael Jacobs, is going to begin at about 1:07 p.m. in the afternoon, and it is going to be a hellish fire that the Confederates rain down upon the Union. Like I said, they don't have their sights aimed in, so many of the guns are actually going to aim a little bit high and over, and there's going to be mass panic in that area on the opposite side of Cemetery Ridge that's not facing the Seminary Ridge, the Confederate line. There's going to be mass panic on that side. George Meade is actually going to temporarily move his headquarters further back the line there to Powers Hill, which, for reference, that's going to be there along Granite Schoolhouse Road off the current-day Baltimore Pike, kind of right after you get past the Visitor Center. So he's actually going to temporarily move his headquarters back there. The Widow Leicester House, which was his headquarters there on the slope going down Cemetery Ridge, that house is going to be absolutely bombarded. We're talking massive loss of pack animals, mules, horses, and then even the guns themselves. What's going to happen is that Henry Hunt, like I said, he had an actual combat role. He wasn't just an administrator. He had charge of men. He's going to order his artillerists on Cemetery Ridge to hold their fire for 15 to 20 minutes before answering. And what's going to happen is Hancock, they're going to receive this attack of artillery, and Winfield Scott Hancock is going to get angry because he's going to wonder why his men aren't firing back. It is demoralizing for men. Sorry, Bug. It is demoralizing for men to receive artillery attack and not have any of their own guns firing back. It feels very one-sided. It's very demoralizing to say, hey, why are these guys not firing? Of course, Hancock used a lot more colorful language, as it were, but essentially he's going to say, hey, why are my guns not firing? A lot of the men are going to say, we're under orders from Henry Hunt, and he said, well, you're on the Second Corps line, and I'm the general of the Second Corps, you need to fire back. So the Union then is going to return their fire. Like I said, a lot of these guns are going to aim high, but there are going to be some guns that hit the Union line, especially Alonzo Cushing's battery there, just north of the copse of trees. They're going to take a hellacious fire. He's going to be down to 2 guns by the end of everything here, by the end of this artillery bombardment. The thing that the Confederates are worried about is ammunition. They lost about 400 rounds crossing the river on the way here. Trying to think of what that river's name was. It wasn't the Potomac. It was another small river that they crossed. The Shenandoah. They're going to lose about 400 rounds crossing the Shenandoah, and unlike the Union, whose supply line was in Westminster, which was, you know, maybe 20 miles away, so they could, it would take a little bit, but they could easily resupply. The nearest supply depot for the Confederates are going to be all the way down in Staunton, Virginia, nearly 200 miles away from this area. So they're not going to be able to resupply as much as they should. The other thing, like I said, is E.P. Alexander is going to be put in charge not only of the 1st Corps Artillery, but he's also going to be the man that is going to be given the go-ahead to make the attack. He's going to be given the authority to call for when Pickett's charge should occur. Because Longstreet saw the folly of the charge. He said no 15,000 men could take that position. So he doesn't want to make the call. So he leaves it up to this colonel of artillery, Edwin Porter Alexander. And Porter doesn't really want to make the call either. Alexander doesn't want to make this call either, because he also sees the folly of it. But, you know, when, I believe the order was, when your fire is the most effective, call forward the infantry, something along the lines like that. But he doesn't want to make the call. And part of the reason he doesn't want to make the call is because of all the smoke. He can't tell whether his fire is effective or not on that Union line. And what's going to happen is there's going to be 18 pesky guns there along Cemetery Ridge. And those guns are going to continue to trade fire with the Confederates. And Porter Alexander is actually going to say, hey, you know, I think we're doing good. And Pickett's going to say, no, we still have those 18 guns there on the cemetery. Of course, they didn't realize that Cemetery Ridge actually had no cemetery on it. Obviously, they hadn't been at that position there themselves. So these 18 guns are going to plague them. Now what Henry Hunt's going to do is, at this point in the artillery exchange, they realize that this is not a screen, this is a preclusion to an infantry assault. So Hunt, one, in an effort to save ammunition, and also to lure the Confederates into making this doomed assault, he's going to order all guns on Cemetery Ridge to quiet. And at that point, why do I keep wanting to say E. Porter? Anyway, sorry. I get very excited. I love artillery. Edwin Porter Alexander is then going to think that he has silenced the guns on Cemetery Ridge, and they are going to then, he's then going to say, well, you better head out now. And that's when the Confederates, of course, are going to step off and make their charge into history. But this artillery barrage was the largest artillery bombardment in the Western Hemisphere. It was rumored that they could hear it all the way in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. They definitely heard it in Harrisburg, York, Hanover, Westminster. They definitely heard it there. But again, it's rumored that they heard it all the way in Philadelphia, all the way in Washington. Michael Jacobs, our good professor friend at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania College at the time, he's going to describe it as the heavens opening up and a terrible thunder. I just can't imagine being here with 161 guns unleashing total fury upon the Union line. There are very few parts of the Civil War that I actually would have liked to have been there. But this is definitely one part I would have liked to see, that just this incredible engagement of artillery. So, like I said, I'm going to show you guys what I think is probably one of the coolest things on the Gettysburg battlefield here. So without further ado, let me make my way to Oak Hill. Video with a treat, and this is it. This is the Whitworth cannon. This is a rifled cannon, iron, and the beautiful thing about this cannon is its range. we were talking earlier about the ranges at 5 degrees elevation. We had, of course, the ordnance rifle, the 3-inch ordnance rifle, and the 10-pounder Parrott. So we were talking ranges of about a mile, 1,700 yards. I want to say like 1,777 yards is a mile. So the range on the Whitworth, however, this thing at a 5-degree elevation, we're talking 2,800 yards. We're talking a mile and a half. Add a little bit more degrees to that elevation, and you're talking well over 2 miles. This is an incredible piece of artillery. And on that artillery barrage on July 3rd that we were just discussing, these things were firing away. Now the unique thing about this at the time was that this had a breech loading mechanism. So they would spin this thing around, pop open the breech, clear out, plunge it out, sponge it out. Then you'd stick your next round in here, plus the charge. Close this hinge here, seal the breech up, and you're good to go to fire. Now this one doesn't have it. I believe the other one might have it, but the way this would shoot is that there was a small hole here right on the back, and you would stick your fuse right here, and that's where you would light it at from the back. So what this allowed the men to do is the cannon crew, instead of being in the front of the cannon where you have to ram it home, sponge it out, this actually provided them a little bit of cover behind the artillery piece. This is just an awesome gun. I think it's so cool. The Confederate States had 2 of these in service. They were in service at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. They were under Hurt's battery of A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. Also in Hurt's battery were 2 3-inch ordnance rifles, so we were talking Hurt's battery was definitely getting some distance in their shots. The effect of this on July 3rd was fairly negligible, but it wasn't so much a physical effect, it was a psychological effect. As Union General John Gibbon would describe it, the shells from the Whitworths coming down sounded like demons whistling through the air. So you can imagine. Now this shell would have been a slightly elongated shell, and they only really used solid shot for these things. The Confederates were actually experimenting with some case shot, with some fragmenting shells for this, but for whatever reason they just couldn't quite get there. There was a big fire at one of it wasn't the Tredegar Iron Works, but another one of these armories in the south. There was a big fire actually developing the shells for this, the exploding shells, not the solid shells, and this fire ended up killing something like 53 people. I just want to kind of touch real quick on the Confederate organization of the artillery versus the Union organization of the artillery. I feel like that's something really important, and I couldn't talk about a video of artillery without discussing that. So in the Confederate artillery, of course, we had the battery. That was your equivalent to a regiment in the infantry. The battery would normally have about 4 guns, whereas in the Union, a battery was 6 guns. And in the Union, they did not have very many mixed batteries. That is to say, all the batteries were of one type of gun. So you would have a battery of Napoleons, you would have a battery of Parrott guns, you would have a battery of ordnance rifles. Whereas in the Confederates, they didn't have the luxury of a very successful industry. We get into the Tredegar Iron Works, there was a lot of quality control issues coming out of there. So a lot of the Confederate guns happened to be guns they captured from the north. For example, the Second Battle of Winchester in the lead up to Gettysburg, I want to say Ewell captured something like 27, 37 guns, somewhere along those lines. So you can see a lot of it is the guns they're able to capture. So the Confederates had a lot of mixed batteries. For example, Hurt's battery here, like I told you, they had the 2 Whitworths, which actually were brought over through the blockade from Great Britain. It was a British rifle, British gun, and they had the 3-inch ordnance rifles. So you had a lot of mixed batteries. There's some pros and cons to that. Some pros would be you were able then to, with your battery, engage the enemy at close range and also at distance. A con, however, would be ammunition. It's much easier to supply a battery that is all Napoleons with specific Napoleon ammunition than to try to get around the logistical obstacles of supplying a mixed battery with both, say for example, Napoleon ammunition and 3-inch ordnance rifle ammunition. So those were some of the struggles that the Confederates had with their artillery. Of course, the Union had an artillery reserve which could be pulled from at any point by any commander if they needed more artillery on the field. We see that happening on July 2nd in the wheat field and peach orchard, especially the peach orchard. Whereas the Confederates, they had gotten rid of their reserve after Chancellorsville, and they had divided up their reserve among their 3 corps. Of course, we have Henry Hunt, Chief of Artillery, who was essentially a line officer who could direct men and give orders to the artillery as he saw fit, whereas Pendleton was much more of an administrator. He was more of a securing supplies kind of a guy, rather than an actual on the field directing troops around sort of officer. So we have batteries, and then 3 or 4 batteries are going to make up a battalion, and then 3 or 4 battalions are going to make up a brigade of artillery. And each corps had about a brigade of artillery. So, like I said, I'm going to end this video here. They're starting to do some weed whacking, the National Park Service. But as far as I know, no other park in America has examples on the field of the Whitworth rifle. So if you get a chance to come out to Gettysburg, where I'm at, I'm on Oak Hill, tucked away right behind the Peace Light Memorial. Luckily the memorial is there so that the troops knew where to put their coolest guns. That's a little joke. But if you get a chance, come out here, check out the Whitworth. Really cool. The beautiful thing about the Gettysburg Park is there's something like 400 cannons on the battlefield. So if you are an artillery nerd like me, if you think everything big and boomy is awesome, you gotta get out here, check it out. Again, this is Forward Gettysburg. My name is Aaron Smith. Thank you so much for letting me geek out over artillery pieces with you. I hope you're enjoying the channel. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.